with Israel, you have a responsible state actor that is trying to protect civilian life whilst necessarily doing what it must to defeat Hamas. On the other side, you've got an organization, Hamas, that is using things like the arrival of humanitarian aid as a bargaining chip. And that just adds to the despicableness of what they've been doing over the last 7 or 8 days.
And foreign nationals might be able to leave Gaza now as the border with Egypt reopens imminently. Of course, that won't include the 10 British people believed to be held hostage by Hamas. Let's speak now to the Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Can we talk about these the 10 British hostages that we believe are being held, presumably in Gaza somewhere? What can you tell us about them and the efforts that are being made specifically to find them? What kind of conversations have you had with the Israeli army?
Well, you heard yesterday when the Foreign Secretary was asked about this, that unfortunately it's not possible to confirm exactly what the number is because, and there's no nice way of saying this, it's not clear who is still alive and who is not. And so in that sense, we have an expectation that there are hostages. We have an expectation that it's about that number. And clearly, we are keen to support whatever efforts the Israeli army is able to make to recover those hostages.
And what will that support entail?
Well, I'm not going to discuss operational details, but it will depend on what the IDF ask for.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has been, like many other people, has been talking about the situation that the civilians in Gaza are experiencing right now, in that obviously Israel has told them to move south. 1 million people moving south, I'm sure you will accept, is a difficult thing to coordinate, to achieve if you are one of those people. He's actually called for the evacuation order on hospitals, specifically in northern Gaza, to be reversed so that health facilities, health workers, patients and civilians can be protected. Do you think that's feasible?
Well, look, such is the way that Hamas operates, that we know that they hide munitions and their fighters within the civilian population, even on occasion beneath hospitals. I think that therefore the Israeli demand that the civilian population move south is the only viable option of protecting human life. And if I may, that is the key comparison here. What we saw last Saturday was Hamas operate with no regard for civilian life. The Israeli government has advised an evacuation so that it can minimize the risk to the civilian population as it goes after Hamas and as it is entitled to do. And it is Hamas, more often than not, that are seeking to keep the Palestinian public in Gaza in order to maintain their human shield.
If Hamas are hiding amongst the fleeing population who are going to the south or who are already in the south, then how safe are those civilians once they get there?
Well, look, I mean, that's one issue. Another issue, which I suspect is of real concern to those planning this mission in the Israeli Defense Forces, is that the longer Hamas have to dismantle their ammunition dumps, the longer that Hamas have to dismantle their arms factories, the less that there is left for Israel to destroy. And so we end up in a situation where Hamas remains able to do things like it did last Saturday, the single biggest non-natural death of Jewish life since the last days of the Holocaust. I think it's entirely reasonable and justified that the Israeli government should seek to destroy Hamas once and for all. But that is an incredibly difficult military problem for the Israeli Defense Forces to prosecute when balancing the need to act quickly whilst those networks are still in place to be struck, versus, as we've seen, them attempting to meet their obligations to the Palestinian public and advising them to move south.
And we've been speaking to General Petraeus, who said that, you know, this has echoed really what you just said there, that this is almost an impossible, but obviously it can't be an impossible task for the Israeli army, and that they, you know, will have to go in, and their view apparently seems to be, understandably, again, in the light of what happened last weekend, to root out, if they have to, street by street, house by house, Hamas fighters and terrorists. But within that, there are obviously so many difficult issues, and you know this yourself as someone who served in the army, about identifying people, and presumably these are conversations that are being had. Foreign Secretary told yesterday about Israel showing restraint while at the same time exercising its right to self-defense. So what kind of factors will come into play? What is the practical nature of trying to do that?
Well, the practical nature is that you do your absolute best to seek to separate the civilian population from combatants. You do your absolute best to target with precision. And clearly, as a number of commentators have been saying over the weekend, the success of this operation will depend on the accuracy of Israeli intelligence. Now, my knowledge of the Israeli Defense Forces and of the Israeli intelligence system is that they are an extraordinarily capable intelligence gathering organization. So I have some confidence that if anybody can do that sort of intel-led precision operation, they can.
On the wider conflict, the Foreign Secretary has told us that Israelis don't want this to turn into a regional conflict, and that that may well inform their thinking about how they conduct these operations. Again, is that a difficult thing to guard against? Is it wishful thinking? Israel attacked Hezbollah sites overnight in Lebanon. Hezbollah fired rockets into northern Israel. Is there an inevitability that this can become even larger than it already is?
Definitely not an inevitability, but clearly, whilst Israel focuses on what it needs to do to destroy Hamas in the Gaza Strip, what you see the rest of Israel's friends do is effectively watching their back. There is a growing US military presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have got Typhoon jets that were already based at RAF Akrotiri, as well as the troops that are permanently based there. In addition to that, 2 surveillance planes are now operating in the region, and the Literal Response Group, which is a contingency capability that was due to be in the Eastern Mediterranean this autumn anyway, has been moved forward by the Secretary of State last week, and so they will be in the region too. All of that is actually not to make any direct support of Israel in Gaza. It is to deter those who might see opportunity to get involved from doing so. It's a very clear and potent expression of Western will that this remains contained as a horrible event between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, not a wider regional conflict.
I want to ask you finally about the Rafa Crossing, which we have been told will open this morning. Is your understanding as well that this is just going to be foreign nationals who might include, for example, the in-laws of the First Minister of Scotland?
Well, certainly we had an expectation that the Rafa Crossing may open today, and the news appears to be breaking as I'm on air that is now an expectation that is had in theatre as well. That is good news, and it gives British nationals trapped in Gaza the opportunity to leave. And I was in Cairo last week, and our embassy in Cairo is very well advanced in its plans so that they are ready to receive those who leave via that crossing and to help them get home. But I also understand from what I'm picking up that it's not yet absolutely certain that will happen. Clearly, it's not something we have any direct control over, but I certainly hope that it does.
But do you think Egypt should be taking more people, not just foreign nationals?
No, look, I mean, I think Egypt is in an extraordinarily difficult situation, and that is why you've seen President Sisi, like the King of Jordan, making a really strong case for the need to get humanitarian aid into Gaza.
And what assurances are there that humanitarian aid will be allowed in?
Well, there are none. Hamas are, as I've said on a number of occasions during this interview, whereas with Israel, you have a responsible state actor that is trying to protect civilian life whilst necessarily doing what it must to defeat Hamas. On the other side, you've got an organization, Hamas, that is using things like the arrival of humanitarian aid as a bargaining chip. And that just adds to the despicableness of what they've been doing over the last 7 or 8 days.
OK, James Heappey, thank you for talking to us. That's the Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey.